My name's Yolanda Caraway, and I am going to be your MC for the evening. So we'd love for everybody to take their seats, and I want to welcome you to the 9th Annual Charles T. Manatt Democracy Awards Ceremony. My name is Yolanda Caraway, and I'm your Master of Ceremonies for the evening. I have a fan club. I'm so honored to host tonight's event with my old friend, Bill Sweeney. When my old friend, Bill Sweeney, called me, and yes, Bill, where are you? We are old. When Bill called me and asked if I would MC his last Democracy Awards dinner, I immediately said, of course, without really thinking about, shh, please, can I have a little respect? I immediately said, of course, without really thinking about how much I have on my plate. But that's what we do. Friends call, we come, and we do it for them. I'm gonna do a little pitch here for myself personally, and I messed up, where's Bob Hickmott, because I didn't bring the book up, but I have a book coming out on October 2nd, and we're about to go on tour next week. So needless to say, I'm a bit frazzled at this point. Thank you, Bob. Yes, yet another political book. But I guarantee you that this one is from an entirely different perspective. It's called For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Politics. And the authors are myself, Donna Brazil, Mignon Moore, and Leah Daughtry. It's a history book and a roadmap for young women who want to go into public service. Some of you in this room are in it, and many of you will recognize a lot of the stories. It's getting great reviews, and I hope you will pick up a copy. You can pre-order on Amazon. And this is the rest of my sales pitch for the evening. But every time I have an audience, my co-authors tell me if I don't try to sell this book, they'll kill me. So I had to do that. It was definitely a labor of love, and I think you all will really enjoy it. I had the distinct privilege to work with Chuck Manatt at the Democratic National Committee. His passion for democracy and standing up for the little guy made him a great leader. It's kind of dark out there, but I can't see, but how many people in this room worked for Chuck Manatt at the DNC? Can you stand up? Will you stand up, please? Can you stand up? Y'all a rough crowd. Well, I did, so. He is missed dearly by the many friends and colleagues who were lucky enough to learn from him and be inspired by him. And tonight we celebrate Chuck's legacy and thank his family, Kathy, Michelle, and Dan, for carrying on his mission. I'm also delighted to honor my friend and IFES President and CEO, Bill Sweeney. We've been friends since we worked together at the DNC in the 80s, and I'm delighted to celebrate his professional achievements as he retires this year. I'm sure all of you are very familiar with the organization and share their vision of a world in which strong democratic institutions empower citizens to have a voice in the way they are governed. From Afghanistan to Zimbabwe, the talented and dedicated team at IFES makes a lasting impact on people's lives. Since 1987, the IFES team has provided critical election assistance to many of the important global elections we've watched from afar in Washington. They're committed to advancing good governance and democratic rights, from election administration and voter education to inclusion and women's empowerment. The IFES team supports the fundamental building blocks of democracy. They work with civil society to ensure women, persons with disabilities, youth, ethnic and religious minorities, and other marginalized populations have a voice and a vote. We are all grateful to the IFES team for its passion and dedication. often working under challenging circumstances to bring legitimacy to the right to vote and give people a say in the way that we are governed. It's through the ballot that sustainable democracy and governance are established, and it's through the work of IFES that stable societies are formed. That stability is critical to building viable economies and encouraging investment, fostering peace and security, and most importantly, providing citizens with the opportunity to succeed. Those societies are stronger as a result of their work, and we in America are also safer as a result of democracy promotion abroad. At this turbulent moment in our global history, I think we can all agree that now, more than ever, we need to stand behind the work of organizations like IFES. Tonight, as we renew our commitment to the IFES mission, we also celebrate 4 remarkable champions for the cause of freedom and democracy. Bill Sweeney has been the president and CEO of IFES for 9 years. He has an impressive depth of experience in election assistance and democracy support. He has observed elections all over the world in over 18 countries so far, from Mexico to Ukraine, from Zimbabwe to Tunisia, from Indonesia to Russia. Ambassador Mark Green is the administrator of the United States Agency for International Development. He's a recognized leader in the foreign policy and business communities. He most recently served as president of the IFES Partner International Republican Institute, but was also the U.S. ambassador to Tanzania and served 4 terms in Congress representing Wisconsin. Senator Chris Coons of Delaware is an advocate for key foreign policy and national security priorities. He's a leading voice on Africa's security challenges and economic opportunities. While in college, he spent a semester in Kenya and returned to Africa in the late 1980s to work in the anti-apartheid movement. In Congress, he is focused on building partnerships in the African continent to ensure that the health programs, food, aid, and economic development security assistance reach those who need it most. Our international honoree is Her Excellency Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who I had the privilege of meeting many years ago when she first became the leader of Liberia. She's the former president of Liberia and a recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011. She's the first woman to be elected head of state of an American country and the world's first elected Black female president. Under her leadership, Liberia worked to heal ethnic tensions following years of civil war. Can we give these amazing honorees a round of applause, please? It is now my great pleasure to introduce my old and dear friend, Bill Sweeney, President and CEO of IFES. Oh, there you are. Ah! Picture! I gave him a book.
I've got the book if everyone hasn't seen it.
Tweet, Facebook, Instagram, everything.
In case anyone missed it. All right. Okay. Thank you for the introduction, for being here tonight, Yolanda, my old dear friend of many years who is about to become a very successful author with her team. I am Bill Sweeney, President and CEO of IFES, and I thank you all for joining us this evening. As you all know, this is a period of transition for me and for IFES as I prepare to stand down at the end of the year. I have the honor to work with a remarkable team of professionals at IFES who are at the forefront of promoting credible and transparent elections and protecting the right to vote. IFES is all about the people, our team, so many gifted individuals that I really can only marvel at the collection of talent and dedication from all over the world that are part of the IFES family. At IFES, we believe the right to vote is a fundamental political and human right. Since 1987, we have worked in over 145 countries across the globe to protect and promote this right. For over 3 decades, the IFES team has dedicated itself to giving a vote to every voice. Like all of you in this room tonight, I am deeply troubled by the growing trends that undermine democratic rights. This is a critical period for the global democracy movement, which faces some very real challenges. From contested election results and the use of different disinformation campaigns to shape public opinion, to the growing mistrust of public institutions, from the exclusion of minority groups and restriction of voting rights, to the apathy among youth and low voter turnout. We all must renew our commitment to stand up for democratic principles and practices. We must continue to deliver sustainable programs that reaffirm the belief that all citizens should have a voice and a vote. As an independent organization, IFES is uniquely positioned to deliver technical advice to election management bodies. Our assistance is tailored to the specific needs and realities of each country and culture that we support. IFES by design stays out of the limelight, allowing our local partners to be at the forefront as we work with them to build sustainable democracies. At IFES, we will continue to champion democracy's role in American foreign policy and work with all of you to advance the right to have a say in how one is governed. Tonight, we honor 3 champions of democracy and human rights who embody IFES's mission and the legacy of former IFES Board of Directors Charles T. Manatt. All of the close friends of Chuck here tonight know that he invented social networking before technology, tools, and platforms were around. Yes, yeah. He was one of the real architects and founding fathers of the global democracy movement. I have the responsibility tonight and the pleasure of welcoming many distinguished guests. And if I do this right, everyone in the room gets a round of applause, okay? So let me start by recognizing our leadership of the IFES Board of Directors, Ken Blackwell and Co-Chair Don Sweitzer, for their leadership. I would also like to thank Ken and Senior Vice President of the Smith's Free Group, Alicia Smith, for generously volunteering their time to co-chair tonight's event. Alicia and the other IFES Board of Directors, would you be recognized? IFES works with public servants, and tonight we have many current and former members of Congress, administration officials, representatives from the diplomatic community, including ambassadors and senior officials from many of the countries that we work with around the globe. Please be recognized. I would also like to recognize IFES's partner in the Consortium for Elections and Political Processes Strengthening at the International Republican Institute and the National Democratic Institute, including IRI's new president, Dan Twining, and NDI's new president, Ambassador Derek Mitchell. Please be recognized. Finally, I get in trouble for this every year, but I continue to do it. I recognize my wife, Susan, Chuck Manatt's wife, Kathy, and Don's wife, Sherry, for supporting all of us. Yeah, Sherry, I was talking about you. For supporting all of us as we spend our free time away from families involved in the work of democracy building. So thank you all. I think everyone got recognized. Anyone who feels like they weren't recognized, we'll do a special round of applause for you. Yolanda, please come back to the stage. Thank you.
Bill, I think you're still supposed to be here, and introduce my groom. I'm saying, okay.
And I am supposed to be recognizing Ken Blackwell and Alicia Smith, our dinner co-chairs. So Alicia, please come forward. I have a book for you.
Excellent. Bill scripted me, so hang on. And I'm only going to ad-lib a little bit, because we are the long and the short of it all. I'm Alicia Smith, one of the two co-chairs for the dinner tonight, along with Ken Blackwell, who is also, as you know, IFES's board chair. Tonight's ceremony serves as a fundraiser with the proceeds going to the IFES Innovation Fund. Some of you are familiar with it, but just in case you're not, let me tell you. The fund provides dynamic and creative IFES team with the necessary support to develop original projects that address important and challenging issues in democracy and governance. And it focuses on these key areas, some of which Yolanda mentioned: promoting gender equality, technology, electoral security, we need that here, I gather, human rights, and inclusion of persons with disabilities. I encourage you to look through the program and learn a little bit more about the good work these people do. I'm pleased to announce that using the funds from last year's dinner, IFES will soon be releasing a tool that outlines strategies for election management bodies to strengthen their own technology and procedures to resist these kinds of vulnerabilities. The holistic exposure and adaptation testing, can you tell Bill wrote this? Or HEAT, H-E-A-T process, aims to secure automated and digitized electoral processes that will be an immediate and timely contribution to the field of electoral administration and security. And FYI, the IFES team is going to be using this tool in the Ukraine elections in 2019, so watch closely and be proud of supporting efforts like this. Tonight's ceremony and the special projects funded by the Innovation Fund would not be possible without all of your generous support. You are all acknowledged in signage in the program, but you should give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you very much. I pressured some of you pretty hard to come to this, and I thank you on behalf of all of our colleagues, including the long of it.
Thank you, Alicia. Tonight's ceremony, as Alicia indicated, celebrates the tenure of Bill Sweeney. After 9 years of service on the IFES board and another 9 years as president and CEO, Bill will soon be stepping down after the selection of a successor. He has been a leading advocate for ensuring the integrity of elections worldwide. We are grateful for his contributions to IFES and the fields of democracy and governance. As Bill knows, I want to go to scripture for references. In Matthew 10, Jesus tells his disciples, "Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be wise as serpents and as harmless as doves." That was great advice for the 3 years that I did at the United Nations Human Rights Commission as the U.S. ambassador to the Human Rights Commission. I've set myself with 52 other colleagues from around the world. Many times the people on the jury should have been in the dock. But we got through it. But it was my preparation for that sort of work that I want to go to because it's given Bill's Irish Catholic heritage. I go to Father E.J. O'Connor, a Marine and a Jesuit, who was one of my mentors. When I was a freshman, Father O'Connor took me and a Jewish classmate of mine, Benji Schwartz, to the Golden Gloves boxing matches at the old Cincinnati Gardens. We watched 11 bouts. The 12th bout, a young boy from the western side of Cincinnati, he too of Irish Catholic heritage, came out, and before his fight, he made the sign of the cross. Benji, who was Jewish, elbowed Father and said, "Father, what's the significance of that?" Father said, "Not a damn thing if you can't fight." Now, I understand that there's symbolic significance to it, but Father was a realist. And one of the things that I've appreciated about Bill is that Bill has been a fighter. He has been wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And that has caused him to be an effective leader for the underrepresented, the marginalized, and the unempowered across the globe. His 9 years of leadership of IFES have at times been trying, but in the main has been fruitful because he has not only been someone who has managed effectively, he's been a leader in the advancement of the ideals of democracy and equality worldwide. So it is my pleasure to, on behalf of the board, to thank him, but to introduce Bill Hybl to the podium to share a more in-depth perspective on Bill's service. But it wouldn't have been right if I hadn't taken the time to say that he's been a friend, and we've been blessed that Susan has loaned him to us to do the whole hard work of advancing democracy and the building of civic communities, civil societies across this globe. Bill Hybl, come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me say at the outset that Bill and I have served on this board 9 years when Bill has been president, but before that for almost 20. And you know, as a longtime friend, I want to tell you that Bill has truly made a difference for this organization and for democracy around the world. His leadership has really led to some remarkable things, but all of these remarkable things have occurred with integrity and honesty. And in today's environment, you know, those are principles that are very important. He's always been available to listen. He's been available to talk with the board, deal with the staff, but importantly, he reshaped the development of ISIS and its whole viability, creating a diverse donor base, which includes Australia, Canada, Switzerland, the European Union, and others. But the fact is, he knew that the landscape in the United States would change. Different administrations would look at democracy building in different ways, and Bill was really there to make a difference. And recently, my wife and I traveled with Bill to the European election officials meeting in Vilnius, Lithuania. And I cannot tell you how those individuals from the 29 countries that were represented knew Bill, respected Bill, and truly made a difference for the United States of America. I think each of us, as we look at impact, as we look at people and what they've done, and there are a lot of people that do things, but how many people do things with impact? He's made a lot of changes in the IFES culture with the individuals that work at IFES, flexible work, paternity leave, and he's done a lot of other things like ice cream socials, potlucks, trivia nights, beer bus. That wasn't in the deal here. But his most important legacy has been the diversification of the organization's areas of expertise, responsibility, and excellence. Look at what we do, at what IFES does in the conduct of election assessments, the integrity with which they work, and you look at women's empowerment, you look at the disability rights field, you look at election technology, and you look at election security. And Bill Sweeney has been there to bring IFES to the very top. But let's look at a video which really talks about this.
I first came to know Bill Sweeney when my longtime friend Chuck Manatt brought him into the highest levels of Democratic politics in the United States. There he was not only a very competent person in running party politics, but he was trusted by both Democrats and Republicans. And he's brought that same sense of trust to IFES over these past several years. He's trusted in the United States, he's trusted around the world, and he's moved IFES forward in a very impressive way. Congratulations, Bill.
I am thrilled to be wishing you well as you move to retirement from IFES. You have given me such great advice over the years, especially about how to stand up for myself and to take risks when the opportunity comes around. Very similar to how you've been able to help so many countries stand up free and fair elections. As a boss, as a mentor, as a purveyor of aircraft paperback books, most importantly as a friend, which I am very much looking forward to continuing and wishing you and Susan the best in your new adventures.
Bill Sweeney, we've known each other in a number of arenas, and I want to reflect on what you stand for in a few of them. Electoral integrity, of course, inaugural integrity, political integrity, and the secret to your success in all of them, personal integrity. Bill, thank you for all that you do, and I'm looking forward to your future adventures.
Really an honor to be able to pay homage to Bill Sweeney, the model boss, the model head office man looking after us out there in the field. You always felt he was there, he was watching you, he was supporting you. Great to work with him.
What I remember is Bill coming to us in Kabul, finding a house of IFES people with cabin fever. We were never allowed out because of the security situation there. And what did he do? He went back to DC and he sent us an enormous jigsaw puzzle. And we built a jigsaw puzzle for the next 3 months. He was wonderful.
Congratulations, Bill Sweeney. You know, you've done a great job not only as the CEO of IFES, but you were a great board member. And I look back now at the innovations that you've done, the way you've treated your board and made us a part of the process. We're all proud of you. Thanks, Bill.
Hi, Bill. This is Judy Human. We started working together when I was at the State Department. I want to thank you for your tremendous leadership in IFES to truly integrate disability into your agenda. Your leadership is something that I hope will continue. Thank you.
Whether it was observing elections in the Philippines or visiting cultural sites in Sri Lanka, Bill always made time to make people feel special and appreciated. Thank you, Big Boss, for all that you've done for IFES, but especially for caring about the people who are in the trenches, day in and day out, the local staff. You and your good humor will be missed.
I want to take a moment to thank you for your commitment to gender equality and women's empowerment, and the inclusion of the rights of people with disabilities in all the work that IFES does. This is your legacy to our organization, and we are better for it.
Salam Bill, greetings from Tunis. I thank you very much for the unique FaceTime you gave to each member of the team last May when you were in Tunis. They felt proud of showcasing their activities, their achievements to you, to the IFES president. They felt value for their hard work and for their achievements. They felt really empowered. Thank you very much, and we wish you all the best for your life after IFES. Yalla.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Sweeney, and I'm Bill's daughter. I'm standing in front of about 150 postcards and letters that I've collected over the course of my life. They're a small fraction of the number of letters and postcards that he sent to me and my mom and my sister, countless other family members, every single time he went on a business trip. Many of the cards have Far Side cartoons on the front. Some were accompanied by little gifts. Sometimes they were longer letters accompanied by articles that he had clipped out and saved for me. But most of them are very short, just a few lines, and they always end, "Miss you, love you, so proud of you." Since I was married, he's added a small note to my wife. "Say hi to Natalie." At the prospect of celebrating his professional career, I felt compelled to share this small personal lifetime achievement. There's certainly evidence that he traveled so much, but to me that they are communiques of love and assurance They are testament to his dedication. Please think of this as an electronic postcard of sorts, and know that I adore you. I'm so proud of you, and thank you for all of the hard work that you've done.
Bill, would you and your family join us on stage for a photo as the Lifetime Achievement Award is presented by our chairman, please? Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. Mr. Chairman. John Sweitzer, would you join us also? Yeah. If you're here. He leaves early a lot. So.
Oh.
That's the truth. Here, Bill.
All right, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You're up. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you to everyone here. And let me just, as I introduced everyone, just let me walk very quickly through some particular thank yous. I mean, obviously, thank you to my family. Without Susan, Sarah, Natalie, Caitlin, Rachel, I'm nothing, and they are there for it. A special thank you to the women and men who really are the IFES team. I've had the privilege of being president, but I've also had the even greater privilege of being able to represent the work that all of you do to make a difference. And in particular, let me just pay a special homage to a partner in crime for the last few years, and that's Michael Svetlik, who has labored long and hard. I've had the distinct pleasure of working for 4 different chairmen in the IFES tradition. That's 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. Let me pay a special tribute to those 4 gentlemen who have provided leadership, guidance, friendship, mentorship, without too much micromanagement or interference with IFES fulfilling our mission. And that, of course, is Peter Kelly, Bill Hybl, Don Sweitzer, and Ken Blackwell. So thank you all very much. The colleagues who are members of the board who have become friends and allies and living proof that promotion of American values and ideals overcomes partisanship, even here in DC. Thank you, Bob and Barbara and others who are here, who, you know, really have brought to our discussions a level of civility about politics that is so rare in our environment right now. So thank you to all of our board members. Colleagues who are here from across the spectrum of the democracy movement, from the United States, from other governments, from even the media, and particularly my friends from my Jungle Gym career ladder, which started with democratic politics and went to the private sector, and finally IFES. Thank you all for being part of the equation or the solution, or there as a friend at so many important moments. I've got 1 or 2 serious things that I want to say here tonight. Ronald Reagan warned us that freedom is never more than 1 generation from extinction. And John Kennedy said, we do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. These 2 statements well define the rationale for our mission and the challenges confronting IFES teams around the world every day. An election in many countries is a simultaneous political risk by all incumbents and a statement of hope and opportunity for the future by everyone not in office. Election day is often the time and the only time when a government has to visibly provide a service to everyone, everywhere, simultaneously. It is easy in this era of low trust in public institutions to challenge, to undermine the credibility and integrity of the vote and the public servants delivering the election. It is more convenient to complain rather than sustain, and what we are all learning is that none of us can take the right to vote or the voting, counting, or actual functioning of the election for granted. Unfortunately, I believe we are witnessing the weaponization of every minute in the electoral process to attack the credibility of the vote, and this is as part of a vision of political success by both domestic and foreign opponents of the values itemized in Article 21 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Since 2009, the IFES team has followed what is known as the Jack Welch rule. Be either first or second in a market, or don't be in the market at all, as well as Gary Hamel's focus on core competencies. That might sound strange at this type of dinner, but this translates into our ambition to be the best in the world at providing technical assistance to election management bodies so that those public servants can deliver and have the citizens have every voice heard and every vote counted in their transition to a culture of democracy and the rule of law. Together, all of us at IFES have helped to define election administration as a discipline within public administration because elections are distinct. IFES has moved the democracy movement away from the anecdotes about the 1948 Texas election and the 1960 presidential outcome in Illinois to a toolkit of programmatic disciplines, frameworks, websites, manuals, and best practices supported by field testing with metrics, dashboards, and scorecards. The proceeds from this dinner underwrite the next contribution, HEAT, which is really a tool to help EMBs with a diagnostic concerning cybersecurity. And once again, we will be groundbreaking in this space, and we will set in place a practice and a discipline that will be adopted around the world, something that we've done in a number of very specific areas. IFES is now recognized as a global leader in gender programming, especially in the sensitive question of violence against women in the political process. In many societies, the first time a woman has worked outside the home is to staff a polling place. For many women, their first engagement in public life is working as a poll worker or a precinct captain. Leadership on disability and inclusion has become a signature issue for IFES. Last January, I was the keynote at a global election conference in India concerning access and inclusion. Almost every case study and illustration used in the two-day conference had an IFES logo. At the Global Disability Summit last summer, IFES was the only democracy and governance NGO invited. It has been an inspiring chapter for all of us, with more people like Nayland So, the 2016, haven't been around that long, awardee, who said, "See our abilities and not our disabilities." Technology, cybersecurity, fake news, bots, sponsorship of election interference, and attempts to undermine the integrity of the vote change dramatically with every election in virtually every country. There is an arms race underway, led by governments and followed by domestic politicians aided by consulting firms. It is not healthy for democracy, and IFES is responding to the challenge, but more needs to be done. My friends, tonight is hopefully the last dinner I have any responsibility for. My first, don't say that, Peter, don't say that. My first was the 1973 Democratic Congressional Dinner. Roz Wyman was the first woman to chair a $1 million Democratic Party fundraiser. Among my duties was being Milton Berle's driver, which impressed my grandmother and my mother. Google Milton Berle for those who didn't get the joke. It is the right time for both transition and refreshing me, as well as new energy and leadership at IFES. I have been able to get by with a little help from my friends through chapters in politics, business, and IFES. Tennessee Williams said, "Life is partly what we make it, and partly what it is made by the friends we choose." Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your constant support of IFES, as we've all taken what I call the best-kept secret in Washington, D.C., to be a global leader in making every voice heard and every vote counted by millions of people creating, by their demand to vote, for their future, democratic cultures and traditions in their countries around the world. Thank you all very much. Yeah.
Bill and I have this friendly bipartisan competition. That Milton Berle reference was pretty hard to beat, but I was mayor after Jerry Springer, which only goes to show sometimes the sublime follows the ridiculous. Let me introduce to you all tonight's Republican honoree. He is a longtime friend of IFES, Ambassador Mark Green. A former president of IFES's SEPF partner, the International Republican Institute, and a two-term director of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Ambassador Green has a long and distinguished career in government and the field of democracy, human rights, and governance. He is currently administrator of the United States Agency for International Development, where he leads the agency's international development and humanitarian efforts. Prior to his post at IRI, Ambassador Green served as president and CEO of the Initiative for Global Development and as U.S. Ambassador to Tanzania. He also served 4 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, representing Wisconsin's 8th District. During his tenure in Congress, Ambassador Green worked on a number of foreign policy initiatives, including the Millennium Challenge Act and former President George W. Bush's emergency plan for AIDS relief. He understands the challenges faced by election management bodies worldwide and has been an important advocate for continued assistance for democracy and human rights. He is not afraid to break the pottery of a stale status quo and to move us towards progress and greater realization of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Please welcome Ambassador Green to the stage to receive the 2018 Charles T. Manatt Award for Democracy.
Maybe it's not up here.
There it is.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ken, for those very kind words. I wish my parents were in attendance this evening. My father would be proud, and my mother would believe every single last word of what you just said. So my saving grace tonight might just be the old adage that you are judged by the company you keep. Tonight, that makes me a very lucky man. In addition to Ken Blackwell, a great inspirational voice in the conservative movement, I'm sharing the spotlight tonight with Senator Chris Coons, a democracy warrior, a good friend, and a fellow Africa hand. I mean, how often do you walk into Senate offices and get greeted in Kiswahili? Shikamo. And of course, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, both living history and a symbol of what Africa can be. So many achievements. We celebrate how she restored peace in Liberia. We celebrate how she restored hope for a new generation across the continent. She is a stinging rebuke to those occasional voices which imply that democracy only works in the West, a view that Ronald Reagan once called cultural condescension or worse. And of course, my friend Bill Sweeney, I have seen him in action in the halls of the Capitol. I have seen him in action in places like Burma and Ukraine. Putting it politely, he is a bulldog for free and fair elections. A few thoughts on the occasion of tonight. And I'm always amazed how quick pundits are to pronounce the decline, if not the demise, of democracy in much of the world. Now, in fairness, there's little doubt that authoritarian forces are doing everything they can to unwind freedom's gains. It's also true that their tactics are more sophisticated and perhaps more devious than ever before. These days, few authoritarians would actually dispute the virtues of democracy head on. They've tried that before, and they failed. Instead, what they seek to do is to redefine the term and hope that nobody will notice. One approach they take is to publicly embrace democracy while working to rig the next elections before they can even get underway. Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro may be the best-known disciple of this approach. Well in advance of this year's so-called elections, his hand-picked Supreme Court effectively absorbed all of the powers of the country's National Assembly. He then created a new assembly, a constituent assembly, which quickly stripped the National Assembly of any remaining power. It soon set about rewriting the Constitution to give him unlimited powers. Two of the most popular election officials, opposition members, seeing that the elections were a sham, dropped out. But that wasn't enough. For good measure, right before Election Day, Maduro changed the location of hundreds of polling places in opposition strongholds. Surprise, he won. He loves democracy. Another tactic they use, phony election observers, zombie observers as many of us call them. Many of them come from China, who's only too happy to help its clients. In advance of this year's elections, Cambodia's Hun Sen took numerous steps to extinguish the political opposition. He not only dissolved the main opposition group and banned it from politics, he even arrested and held in jail its leader. And then at the same time, he announced that he actually wanted election observers in, international observers. They would see how smooth elections can be. Well, especially when you don't have any opposition. Traditional democratic voices, US, Canada, Europe, refused to take part. China, which also purchased the election equipment for those elections, was of course only too happy to oblige. The Chinese praised the election as orderly. And yet another tactic authoritarians use is to so restrict civil society and independent media that the party line propaganda is the only voice their citizens can hear. In Iran, 7 journalists were recently jailed and flogged for covering a protest. In Venezuela, a freelance photographer was recently whisked away to military prison. And in just the last day or so, Nicaragua's regime forces shot students as well as the journalists covering them. 41 journalists were in prison in China at the end of 2017. So, in other words, my friends, I can understand why some fret about the challenges that the global democracy movement is facing. Our opponents are increasingly sophisticated in the ways that they seek to frustrate the will of the people. But what I don't understand is the gloom that too many have over the future. They act as though authoritarianism is an unstoppable force, as though democracy is in irreversible decline, that its best days are past. In the Trump administration, we simply do not agree. The only way democracy will fall away is if we let it, if we surrender. And I promise you, this administration and my agency will never surrender. To adapt a phrase from my friend Secretary Secretary Mike Pompeo, this is a time for democracy to get its swagger back. Tonight, right now, let's be clear. The activists, the grassroots champions, those partners that Bill Sweeney was talking about, they have never lost theirs. Despite the threats and violence, Las Damas de Blanco, Cuba's ladies in white, still gather every Sunday and then peacefully walk through the streets of Havana to protest human rights violations. Despite Ortega's brutal crackdown, his regime's shoot-to-kill policy against students, the defiling of churches, the attacks on priests, Nicaragua's citizen activists continue to protest for peace and free elections. What keeps these and other brave souls going is they realize something that too many people back here seem to have forgotten. Those anti-democratic tactics that I've described aren't signs of strength. They are proof of weakness. The authoritarians are not motivated by courage, they are driven by fear. Quite simply, tonight, let's remember, the authoritarians are afraid. They're afraid of students and women and priests. They are afraid of reporters and cameras and bloggers. They are afraid of their own people and their dreams for the future. They are afraid of freedom. According to recent reports, Chinese censors are busily scrubbing the internet of images of Winnie the Pooh. That's right, the bear of very little brain, because some apparently believe he bears a subversive resemblance to President Xi Jinping. I ask you, is that a sign of strength or weakness and self-doubt? We should celebrate tonight because there are leaders like Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. There are brave students and priests in Nicaragua, Cuban wives and mothers who march to highlight the plight of political prisoners. There are journalists who, despite the floggings, the imprisonment, the threats, they will do whatever it takes to bring voters the truth. We should celebrate tonight because there are people like the great team at IFES and Bill Sweeney who work tirelessly to ensure that citizens have a chance to shape their future. We should celebrate tonight, not because democracy is flourishing in every corner of the world, but because it remains the highest and best hope for people everywhere. And we, USAID, and all of you, we will never surrender that hope. I'm truly grateful for this award, all that it represents, and I salute every one of you for what you are doing. Thank you. God bless.
You know, thank you, and congratulations to Bill Sweeney and Mark Green. Please welcome IFES Board Co-Chairman Don Sweitzer, another very old and dear friend of mine from the DNC days. Don's going to introduce the next honoree, Senator Chris Coons. Don?
Yep, here I am. Thank you, Yolanda. And we are old pals of many years, for sure. And I'll buy your book. And tell your colleagues that too. So, Christmas present, yeah. So,
You were a mere child then,
yeah, I was, Peter, and you found me and changed my life. And let me also say, before I introduce Senator Coons, let me add my congratulations to my pal, Bill Sweeney, who is also a friend of 35 plus years. And we have, over the many years, we have been involved in a lot of democratic mischief in various ways, in various campaigns, in various institutions, and then rolling into the last several years with IFES. So my congratulations to you. And also to Peter Kelly, who just spoke up out of turn, as he always does. Peter, as you know, was introduced earlier as one of our former chairmen, but Peter has been a mentor in my life, and more than, Peter has made a couple of career decisions for me. He hasn't mentored me and suggested, but about 30 years or so ago, Peter talked to me, invited me to breakfast at the Four Seasons. We had a nice breakfast, and I was about to phase out of a political job, as you do in this world, and Peter said, well, your next job, you're going to work for my firm. He didn't say, I'd like you to come and talk to the people at the firm. He said, you're going to work for my firm, which I did. And then about 9 years ago, he invited me to a board meeting of IFES, and some of the veteran members will remember this. He invited me to come to a board meeting and sit through the board meeting, which I did, and it was nice, and nobody knew who I was, except for a couple people. And as we left the meeting and we were walking out of the meeting, Peter said, by the way, you're now a member of the IFES board, and that's how I got on this board. So anyway, Peter has guided my life for many, many years. Let me say a few words about Senator Coons, our honoree with the Democratic Charles T. Manatt Award. Senator Coons was first elected to the U.S. Senate in 2010, having previously worked as an attorney and served in Newcastle County government in Delaware. And by the way, even though Sherry and I reside in Delaware, and the senator knows this, we consider Senator Coons our third and Tom Carper our fourth senator, because we've owned a house in Rehoboth Beach for many, many years, and therefore we count Senator Coons as one of our own. And so we consider him our senator. As a U.S. Senator, he sits on the Senate Appropriations Committee, Foreign Relations, Judiciary, Small Business and Entrepreneurship, and also the Ethics Committee. So that's a pretty busy schedule if you pick up the front page of the Washington Post any day. Senator Coons is also the senior Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Oversight, Agency Action, Federal Rights and Federal Courts, and the Appropriations Subcommittee on Financial Services and General Government. As a young man, Senator Coons studied in Kenya and worked with the South African Council of Churches in the anti-apartheid movement.
in South Africa. Since then, he has continued to advocate for stronger partnerships between the United States and Sub-Saharan Africa, organizing Opportunity Africa, which is an annual conference promoting trade and investment on the continent. As co-founder of the Senate Human Rights Caucus, he recognizes the role of United States leadership and assistance in promoting peace, democracy, and human rights across the region. Senator Coons' leadership and public service have left a lasting impact on the United States and its allies and strengthened democratic institutions around the world. And it is for those reasons that IFES awards Senator Coons its 2018 Charles T. Manatt Democracy Award. Let me introduce to you Senator Chris Coons of Delaware.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Don. Thank you for the introduction, for your service to IFES, and for your payment of taxes to the state of Delaware. Should anyone else be interested, we have beautiful beachfront property available for sale, and I could arrange for you to be incorporated in the state of Delaware in 15 minutes or less for $49.95. I have an iPhone application to that effect. We can have your first board meeting done before we leave this evening. I'm not kidding, actually. When you're as small as Delaware, you've got to be agile, which is also my re-election campaign theme. When you're this small, you've got to be agile. Anyway, I do not want to move ahead without missing this important point, which is that to Bill Sweeney, thank you for your remarkable leadership of IFES. Thank you for fighting for democratic rights, for promoting transparent and accountable governance and empowering marginalized people. And the things that Alicia announced that are the beneficiaries of this evening's dinner are exactly the sort of thing that we've looked to IFES and to Bill for so many years. And as I shared with him off the side, from one father to another, if my daughter, Margaret Catherine, should ever someday say about me things anywhere near as loving and supportive and just beautiful as what his daughter, Caitlin, had to say in that compelling video, I would die a happy man. So let's give Bill Sweeney another round of applause if we might. I'm also grateful to Liz Seidel, who helps connect Allie Davis and Tom Mancinelli, who are my terrific folks who work on foreign policy for me. Keeps us connected. What that really means, I'm just translating staffese here, what that really means is this is how the senator knows what the hell to do on the annual appropriations bill on democracy and governance. So to Liz, to Don, to Bill, to everybody from IFES, thank you very much, and that does deserve a round of applause. To Alicia Smith, I don't know what I did to deserve your friendship, but I am so grateful. For the co-chair of this evening's dinner, a Delawarean and a tremendous and tireless advocate, someone who both fights for intellectual property and is concerned about democracy and governance around the world and in our beloved first state. Thank you, Alicia. And to my two dear friends who are also honorees this evening. A large part of why I wanted to be here this evening was to compliment, to brag on, to say deservedly good things about Administrator Mark Green and Madam President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. I have deep admiration and respect for both, and it is a genuine honor that I believe I do not deserve to share a podium this evening with both of them. As many of us here have learned through long years of difficult work, democracy is dangerous. It is uncertain. It is not given or guaranteed. It must be earned, and it must be refought for in every generation. Democracy isn't a destination. It is a constant work in progress, a push and a pull that reminds us that progress is not always linear, and that if we believe in democracy, we have to act like it. You know, democracy, as was mentioned in Administrator Green's remarks, is facing its most serious test in over a decade around the world today, on nearly every continent. We see increased polarization, attacks on journalists and the press, rising nativism, a disregard for the rule of law, the stifling of dissent, erosion of rights and freedoms. According to Freedom House 2018 marks the 12th consecutive year of decline in global freedom, as countries with democratic backsliding outnumbered those with registered gains. And even in countries recently considered promising democratic successes, authoritarians have risen. And as a global community, our institutions and democratic processes are being tested like never before. But I also think it's important, before I completely ruin the mood of this otherwise celebratory dinner, note to self, will not be reinvited to IFES function. Truly grim post-dinner comments. I wanted to make sure I also gave some remarks on the positive side of the ledger. As Administrator Green so rightly commented, we need in some ways to get our swagger back, to recognize that democracy is ours if we will but fight for it, and to celebrate those people around the world who are not waiting for America to return and to revive and to engage in their particular country or region, but are charging ahead with the hard work of democracy. On a continent very close to my heart, where I have followed or watched or supported or been engaged in the work of democracy, the people of Gambia, a country I took a delegation of 7 members to in August of 2017, they took an amazing step forward by electing President Barrow, and a successful regional effort helped pressure longtime dictator Yahya Jammeh to respect the will of the Gambian people and finally step down after 22 years. It is not a coincidence that President Sirleaf, our honoree this evening, played a critical role in assembling that regional effort on behalf of democracy. You know, in February in South Africa, a nation I admire, they made a significant positive turn in a transition to a new president after the South African people demanded change and rejected Jacob Zuma, president who, over 9 years of rule marred by corruption and mismanagement and fiscal scandals, had taken the storied ANC to a place of lower regard in the nation and the region. Just yesterday, I had the true delight and honor of meeting President Cyril Ramaphosa, actually not meeting for the first time, re-meeting him since we first met in 1987, when he was an underground leader of a national union of mine workers during the state of emergency. And I'm convinced that the transition towards a stronger and clearer democracy in South Africa happened because of the Constitutional Court, because of the strength of the free press, because of the vibrancy of the commitment to democracy in this country from which we have so much to learn. During a stunning upset just in May, for the first time in Malaysia's post-independence history, the opposition is now in power. Former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad ended the 6 decades-long one-party hegemony in Malaysia, and I could, and sadly I will, go on. Just this past Sunday, citizens in the Maldives rejected the incumbent president, Yamin, in an extraordinary rebuke to a leader who had recently been jailing political opponents and judges, and who had drawn his country closer and closer to China during a tumultuous 5-year term. And as I was just hearing from my good friend Mark Green, there are such encouraging developments in Ethiopia, where new Prime Minister Ahmed is making progress in a nation that had seemed to be sliding inevitably towards authoritarianism, and is now engaging in an open and peaceful way with neighbors with whom it had had a frozen conflict for decades. Let me turn to my colleagues, if I could, briefly. My fellow award recipients here tonight are genuine champions for freedom and democracy who've made a real difference in gains around the world. You've chosen wisely. Administrator, Ambassador, Congressman Mark Green has dedicated his life to advancing the principles of democracy and good governance. From his work in Tanzania as ambassador to his service in Myanmar, and his work is guided, I believe, by a moral clarity and an unyielding belief in a strong American role in the world. He's someone who, before last year, I'd only known or admired from afar because we are both Rafiki of the people of Tanzania. I'd heard many times about his service there. And as a congressman, he had crafted some of the most effective tools in the toolkit for development work. The Millennium Challenge Corporation, PEPFAR, are both remarkable and literally life-saving and development-transforming tools. But what I've admired most about Mark in my work with him, as we've hammered out legislation and found ways to compromise on our very real differences, is the way in which he has successfully advanced the Trump administration's agenda and vision while being willing to listen to just a little bit of input every now and then from a Democrat from a small state like me. I will tell you, I was just having a conversation with someone from the Bipartisan Policy Center that you don't see this on cable news enough. Mark and I may come from different political parties. We may come from different states. We may come from different experiences, but we share a deep and core belief that the United States has a role and a responsibility in the world. Last year, Mark was kind enough to come and speak at the annual summit that is hosted in Delaware that the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition is pulling together this year, by the way. Another invitation to come and incorporate in Wilmington is November 16th. This year it's November 16th, and we will have an incorporation bazaar just outside of the, I'm sorry, I really shouldn't make light of it, I know. America's Corporate Switzerland, Delaware, open for business. Yeah. Right? I mean, you got to keep selling. You just got to keep selling. All of us know, but Mark knows better than any, because he is responsible for an agency that funds and supports and drives not just the mechanisms of elections, but the reality of an open, free society in so many countries around the world. Mark said something in Myanmar this year that struck me. He said, and I quote, "Our experience tells us that one election does not make a democracy. One election by itself is simply a milestone in the journey to a vibrant democracy, to a real democracy." If you think about both the content and the context, saying that in Myanmar and meaning it as a core principle, as someone who represents the Trump administration in the world, that was a reminder to me of all the different ways I admire the service and leadership of my friend and colleague, Administrator Mark Green. Please give him another round of applause, if you might. Madam President, in January of this year, Liberia experienced its first transfer of power from one democratically elected president to another in over 7 decades. When President Sirleaf respected their constitution, the rule of law, and the will of the Liberian people in her decision to step down after 2 successful terms as Liberia's president. Under her leadership, Liberia emerged from a devastating civil war to become a champion of democracy and peace in West Africa. The day President Sirleaf became president, there was not only no electricity in the country, but no electricity in her own presidential offices. The destruction wrought by years of civil war was unspeakable. Liberia was in tatters. But when I first met her 7 years ago, I was struck by the depth, the persistence, the determination, the ferocity of her passion for her people and commitment to reuniting and rebuilding her nation, a nation with a long and close association with the United States, a proud nation, a nation deserving of our respect, and whose leader speaks to us of its heart, a heart that refused to yield its commitment to democracy. I had the blessing of visiting Liberia for the occasion of her second inauguration with our then Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Liberia had just held national elections, and President Sirleaf said the second election is the true test of the will of the people and the institutions they've worked together to create. If the second election works, it establishes a pattern, a tradition, a routine of democracy that subsequent elections can follow. Now, as I remember it, and please don't correct me, in the audience in front of President Sirleaf that day, and it was sweltering in the heat, and the Secret Service around our Secretary of State were concerned because they had seen a number of men who they believed to be armed out in the crowd. In the audience that day were many opposition leaders who had fought the civil wars, opposition leaders who just days before were contesting or resisting the results of the election and refusing to recognize President Sirleaf as president. What President Sirleaf did that day at the conclusion of her brief but pointed inaugural address, I will never forget. She spoke of the importance of democracy, of unity, of healing and reconciliation. And in a gesture both bold and open-hearted, she then stepped forward to make it real. She called upon the opposition leaders there that day to come forward and embrace her. And in so doing, to demonstrate to the people of Liberia that democracy had worked, that the election was over, and that the nation would move forward. There was, I will tell you, not a small amount of anxiety among the American Secret Service, as she threw her arms wide open and stepped forward, looking both determined, defiant, and somehow welcoming at the same time. She called upon the opposition leaders to come forward, and gradually, slowly, like recalcitrant schoolboys called out, they did. They moved forward, they stepped to the stage, they embraced her, challenged by the courage of her stance, and the entire audience erupted in cheers. When others might have celebrated their own electoral triumph or tried to relegate their opponents to the sidelines, she elevated them. She specifically said, "One of you may well be elected in the next election, because I promise this is my last." I was so moved by her fierce commitment to democracy in that moment and in the years that followed, in the ways she conveyed and conducted her commitment to democracy that day, and in how she helped her nation face the dread disease of Ebola. I have known many strong and brave women in my life. I was raised by one, I'm married to one, I am father to one, but I have met few who are the match of my friend, Madam President. Please give her another round of applause. So in closing, this is why the work you do at IFES is so vital. You know, for 30 years in 145 countries around the world, IFES has worked to empower millions to exercise their fundamental democratic right. As President Sirleaf's example demonstrates, the fight for democracy doesn't end at the polls. Just because a country holds an election with all the machinery doesn't mean, as Administrator Green had said, that it is a full and vibrant democracy, an engaged citizenry, a capable and independent judiciary, a functioning opposition, a vibrant press. All of these are essential. I want to close by briefly telling you about some things we are doing here at home. I will never forget traveling to Halifax with my friend and colleague, Senator John McCain of blessed memory. And we were speaking to a Ukrainian leader who said, "Your own democracy has been attacked. How can we count on you to defend our young democracy if you will not stand up and defend yours?" I was earlier today with my friend and colleague James Lankford, a conservative Republican of Oklahoma, with whom I share the joy of an appropriations subcommittee. And I'll tell you that we worked hard. I meant that seriously. Such cynics you people are. But wait for it, there's actual joy in here. James Lankford and I, divided by geography and values and traditions and party though we may be, managed to come together to provide $380 million in election grants in the last fiscal year to all the states and counties in the country that faced the challenge of securing the election machinery this season before another round where I think we face real challenges. And Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota has worked closely with James on the Secure Elections Act, which the majority leader should take up for a vote, which provides the legal machinery for the protection of our elections. James and I are the only two members of the Senate today with divinity degrees. And I help sometimes couples that are about to wed. I was on the phone this weekend with a couple whose wedding I'll soon perform, and we were talking about their wedding vows. And as I've thought about it, in some ways, the opening of the Declaration of Independence, the statement that we hold these truths to be self-evident, the commitment to the idea that every one of us is equally worthy before the law, before God, and at the polls, is our wedding vow to each other as a nation and to the world. It is the premise and the promise of America. It is the ideal that others have looked to us for generations, and it is the truth which we now must prove we believe. This summer we celebrated the centennial of Nelson Mandela's birth. And I'll tell you, it is, I believe, from the nation of Africa that leaders will rise and have risen, who will challenge us to prove to the world that we mean what we say, that we have not broken faith with the pledges we made more than 2 centuries ago in the small town of Philadelphia, so near my hometown, that we will stand and fight for our democracy at home and everywhere in the world. Thank you very much. Good night. God bless you.
Yeah, stay right there. Now we got to get out here for a picture.
No, I didn't need to be with you.
No, you are. Congratulations to Senator Coons. And from me to him, I just want to thank him for speaking truth to power all the time. So now I'd like to welcome Bill Sweeney back to the stand, back to the podium to introduce our international honoree, Her Excellency Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia.
Thank you, Yolanda. Okay. First of all, thank you, Yolanda. Congratulations, Senator Coons. Congratulations to Mark Green. My job tonight is to introduce a 3-minute video prepared by Voice of America, our media partner. Before I read a series of awards that the President has given that Chris so eloquently delivered, I'm going to take a personal note of exception and tell you my first meeting. We were opening our USAID project in Liberia. The President was willing to bring me and the chairman of the Election Commission in for a conversation. As all of you know, when you have these meetings with elected leaders, you walk in, you tell them what you're going to do, they nod, they say thank you very much, they leave. We came walking in, and she looked at us and said, okay, here's my vision for Liberia. This is how democracy fits within the vision for Liberia. This is what the Election Commission is going to do. You're going to help them do their job so as to achieve democracy in Liberia, so as to achieve my vision. Any questions? And I said, well, Madam President, usually the meeting goes this way. She looked and said, I don't have time for that. Any questions? And I said, well, no, ma'am, we've got our orders. And the chairman of the Election Commission looked at me and went, yep, we got our orders, let's get out of here. Whereupon she stood up and left. And so what was to be, a half hour of conversation, was done in about 7 minutes. And after listening to what Senator Coons had to say, you now understand my first experience with this great lady. Using that as an introduction, Voice of America has presented a 3-minute video clip, and we'll use that as the introduction of our awardee. Could we roll the clip?
Imagine if you were Ellen Johnson Sirleaf in 2005,
Ellen Johnson Sirleaf,
newly elected president of Liberia. More than 20 years of coups and civil wars had ravaged the country. Its people were among the poorest in the world, and the country itself faced crippling debts that the international community demanded be paid. Your challenge: to rebuild Liberia's shattered infrastructure, convince the rest of the world to lift sanctions against Liberia, and keep the support of the people. Liberia had looked for a president who could help bring the nation together. The country was weary of suffering at the hands of men. She pledged to address those root causes of conflict and division, such as poverty and exclusion. A former banker, she put her skills to work and got help from the U.S. and the international community. By 2010, Liberia's debts were erased. She moved to ease the tensions at the root of the civil wars creating a Truth and Reconciliation Committee to heal ethnic tensions, and launched an effort to attack corruption at all levels of society. She put government funds into building or renovating hundreds of markets across Liberia where the so-called market women could sell their wares. She created a foundation to educate market women and support girls' education. Her Liberian Action Plan on Women, Peace, and Security strove to bring about women's full participation in Liberia's recovery, reconstruction, and governance. She opened Liberia's police and army to women and implemented one of the most comprehensive anti-rape laws in Africa. She established a fast-track court to deal with gender-based violence. She inspired a generation. The world also took notice. In 2011, she was honored for her work as a recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts to bolster women's rights and establish peace. And soon after, she was re-elected as president. But during her second term, she faced an unknowable challenge: a deadly epidemic of Ebola. Liberians panicked. Scientists predicted more than 1 million would die there. She mobilized an international effort for relief, research, and treatment of the sick. The hospitals, public health workers, and soldiers needed to combat Ebola in Liberia and calm the people. Although more than 4,000 Liberians died of the disease, within 2 years, Ebola was largely eradicated in Liberia, thanks to their work. Some leaders might have used the epidemic as an excuse to break the Constitution and run for a third term. Instead, she did something that hadn't been done in Liberia in 7 decades: oversee the peaceful transfer of power to another elected leader. On a continent where leaders don't have a history of departing democratically, Johnson Sirleaf stands out in her commitment to electoral integrity. For her dedication to democracy and human rights, IFES honors former President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia with the Charles T. Manatt Democracy Award.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome me in welcoming President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm deeply touched and humbled to be the recipient of the 2018 Charles T. Manatt Democracy Award. I thank you, President Bill Sweeney, IFES Chairman Ken Blackwell, former Chairman Peter Kelly, the Board of Directors, the Manatt family, including Kathy and Michelle, who are here tonight. I'm honored to accept this award on behalf of the women and men of Liberia and of Africa. Those who supported me, and particularly those who voted for me in October and December of last year, when they then decided, after my time was over, that they would choose a new leader. And I turned over the authority of government to President George Weah on the 27th of January this year. It was, as mentioned by Senator Coons, the first time in more than 70 years that presidential power had been transferred peacefully and democratically in Liberia. Liberia today remains a fragile state. Institutions are still young, they're being tested, and resources remain scarce. Nations in a state of fragility, particularly post-conflict nations, need special attention and support. We ask that you,
our supporters, our partners remain focused on Liberia. In these turbulent times, the country must continue as a post-conflict success story. We ask that you actively engage the new government of President George Weah. IFES started its work in Liberia shortly after the beginning of 2003, our 2003 Comprehensive Peace Agreement. Since 2004, IFES has been working with Liberia's election officials, with civil society organizations, to strengthen the local management of elections. We are all grateful for that assistance, and I have witnessed firsthand the impact of the work of IFES and how it has helped to make Liberia's electoral process more transparent. I had great pleasure to meet with Bill and Chairman Ken Blackwell, and they visited Monrovia on Election Day last October. Indeed, the entire IFES team worked tirelessly during a challenging electoral process. I would like to recognize the many persons in this room who have helped to bring us to where we are. They include the president of the International Republican Institute, Dan Twining, the president of the National Democratic Institute, Derek Mitchell, and the president of the National Endowment of Democracy, Carl Gershom. Together with IFES, your institutions have been instrumental in Liberia's democratic transition. Thank you so much. I also wish to recognize U.S. Aid Administrator Mark Grain, who's already been so well recognized by many tonight, who has supported Liberia since he was a member of Congress from Wisconsin. More recently, as a Board Director of the Millennium Challenge Corporation, Mark was at the MCC when Liberia was named the threshold country, qualified as a compact nation, and signed its first compact. This was one of the proudest accomplishments of my administration, because with that, Liberia put its turbines back to work with the repair of our hydroelectric plant. Finally, I want to salute you. Senator Chris Coons, a fellow honoree, Liberia's champion, and my dear friend. Senator Coons, you've been a leading voice for Africa as a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, working with your Republican colleagues and across Pennsylvania Avenue, regardless of the occupant of the White House. I see you're at it again. With a joint opinion article you wrote with U.S. Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross in support of the BUILD Act, which will create a development finance institution capable of meeting the infrastructure needs of Africa. Senator Coons, what can I say? We want to thank you. Liberia's successful political transition is reflective of Africa's quest for democracy. It is a continuum of the continent's struggle for liberation and freedom. This is particularly important in Africa, where we tend to focus on election and celebrate them as the milestone. But as it is often said, and it was said tonight, elections do not a democracy make. We must look behind the process examine the barriers that shut down competition before the campaign ever starts. As I said in Kigali this past April at the annual meeting of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, we must identify the barriers to entry into political society and break them down one by one. Democracy must evolve from a single event into the institutionalization of a process that provides access to all of its participants. We must look anew, not just as respecting constitutional term limits, but at adjusting constitutions to address campaign finance, to encourage the participation of women and the engagement of youth, and to strengthen the civil service. On behalf of our youthful population, we must ensure that African leaders respect the right of their people to determine their future. I stand with the organizations in this room who have devoted themselves to strengthening democracy institutions all across Africa. I had the honor to lead the joint NBI-IRI observer mission to Zimbabwe in July to observe the country's first elections since Robert Mugabe was not on the ballot. Despite the many reported lapses, Election Day was euphoric due to the extraordinarily large voter turnout. The atmosphere quickly changed when, in response to peaceful protests, the government then unleashing post-election brutality reflective of the country's authoritarian past. Zimbabwe's new president must make a new start, must be able to prove to himself, not to those of us who observe the elections, but to his own people. And we count on him to be able to bring the change that his people have so long fought for. He must show tolerance and inclusion, respect for the rule of law, a commitment to honor the individual rights of all citizens, and most importantly, for fundamental institutional reform across all sectors in society. These are the essential ingredients for sustainable peace. And as we look at the upcoming political contests in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, and Cameroon, we must continue to ask that they too follow the path of democracy. It is not acceptable to weaponize the rule of law to prevent opponents from competing in political contests. We, as an international community of stakeholders, must raise our voices not just on Election Day, but well before the playing field is distorted. And for those who have served their country for extraordinarily long periods, it's time for legacy. Time for a successful and peaceful transfer of power to a new generation of political leaders. Love of country is also about letting go. One cannot talk about democracy in Africa without noting the challenges of institutional and systemic corruption, one that vigorously fights back, often with an overpowering display of strength. I salute my dear sister, my dear small sister, Nigeria, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, with her new book that reveals the deadly consequences of fighting corruption. Notwithstanding, this battle must be won if Africa is to prosper, and that the only way to succeed is to make the institutions stronger than the individuals. But even with all of these hiccups, dear friend, with your work, with your support, the African continent continues its unstoppable movement toward participatory democracy, stability, and sustained economic development. Democracy, we all know, is never given on a silver platter. It must be earned, defended, and nurtured every day, everywhere, in Africa, in Europe, and in the United States. There's no alternative to having the freedom we want unless we are prepared to work and sacrifice for it. This is the prevailing spirit in the world today. And for those who come from the old ways and are struggling to find new ways, we salute the enterprising young spirit, which we hope will ensure that democracy, particularly in Africa, will remain secure for future generations. The pressure builds for democracy. Young people today are educated, skillful, demanding, and eventually will have to listen. And I think that will happen to all of those who are lagging. Dear friends, in closing, I want to once again say to IFES and all of those that are part of the IFES family, to all of those that continue to support IFES to promote good governance and democratic leadership across the African continent, God bless the IFES team, all of you who work for it, that choose a life of service to others. Thanks to all of you in this room, those beyond who have been with us, who continue on this long journey for ensuring that peace, democracy, stability, and sustained development continues for Africa and for the world. Thank you so much.
Wow. I feel truly honored to have been a part of tonight's celebration of democracy and 4 remarkable individuals. I'd like to applaud the IFES team, led by Bill, for their continued efforts to give a vote to every voice. Please join me with a final round of applause for our honorees and our IFES colleagues. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope you had a great time. See you next year. Have a great evening.